In the times before ships were powered by steam or diesel engines, the time to sail from the port out to sea often depended on high tides. At low tide, if there was not enough water under the keel of the ship, it could not leave the dock. Though in theory, a ship could sail as soon as the incoming tide was high enough, captains would often wait until the moment after the tide had turned. In this way, ships could more easily make their way out to sea without the resistance of a current on the incoming tide. It was from this practice that we get the figurative expression in English, to sail with the tide. A possible equivalent expression more commonly heard today might be to go with the flow. Both expressions have to do with operating according to the prevailing conditions, or not pushing against prevailing behavior, attitude, or social norms, or not trying to exert a large amount of influence on a situation or course of events or actions. Now let's suppose we're not sailing with the tide, but actually against it. With which is this easier to do? With an attitude of happiness or an attitude of joy? What's the difference? Happiness tends to be externally triggered and is based on external factors. For instance, things, places, events, thoughts, and other persons. In other words, happenstance. What's happening? Joy, however, is more consistent and cultivated internally. It comes when you make peace with who you are, how you are, and why you are. Which one may be more about sailing with the tide? Which one may be more about sailing against it? And which one is more important when it comes to attitudes and world language teaching? What exactly is joy? In the Greek of the New Testament, it is defined as chara, or cheerfulness, calm delight, gladness. As Merriam-Webster describes it, joy is the emotion evoked by well-being, success, or good fortune, or by the prospect of possessing what one desires. Synonymous to this, particularly in the intransitive sense, is delight. Delight is defined as to take great pleasure, or perhaps extreme satisfaction. In the Evangelical Dictionary of Theology, joy is described as a delight in life that runs deeper than pain or pleasure. From a biblical perspective, it is not limited to nor tied solely to external circumstances. As a gift of God, like all inner gifts, it can be experienced in the midst of extremely difficult circumstances, even in the midst of chaos. Rather than a fleeting emotion, it has to do with a choice. That's a conscious and intentional choice to keep a positive attitude even in spite of whatever may be one's overall quality of life in any given moment. As one reads in Psalm 16:11 and Romans 15:13, joy is grounded in God Himself. It flows from Him. It's not an isolated or occasional consequence of faith, but rather an integral part of one's whole relation to God. Joy is connected with God's salvation. From Jesus' words in John 15:9-14, we can know that it is inseparable from and connected to love and obedience. As we know from Galatians 5:22, it's a vital fruit of the Spirit. What is significant about all of this when it comes to us as world language teachers? In a blog post titled Creating a Positive Classroom Atmosphere, Hester Zhang, who teaches English to children in China, had these thoughts to share. Every student must feel safe and important in the class in order for maximum learning to take place. A positive classroom environment does not just happen. The teacher creates it. A positive classroom environment yields positive students who are motivated to learn. They will learn better and engage more. It's one of the most effective and powerful tools a teacher can use. Examples which Zhang cites include smiling at your students anytime you see them, and finding other ways to talk, teach, and communicate positively to help your students feel like you want them to be there. Additionally, Zhang writes of showing extra patience and calmness when learners may be causing you to feel annoyed. How might the joy we're talking about today factor into this? How might starting with a joyful attitude in the Lord make it easier for you as the teacher to pull this off? In Proverbs 15:13, we read of how a joyful heart makes a cheerful face. As Pastor Kent Crockett in Prattsville, Alabama, describes this, when we have joy in our hearts, it will be obvious to everyone. However, even as joy is a Galatians 5 fruit of the Spirit, does enjoyment of this fruit necessarily come automatically? Could it ever be not there in one moment and poof, it's automatically right there in the next? As with any literal kind of fruit, joy is one that actually takes seeking and finding right where it is growing. If it's growing wild, you have to go to the patch where the bushes are growing. If you happen to be the one growing it, it takes the planting of seed earlier on, and then watering and keeping the field, garden, or orchard weeded and pruned. Afterward, most importantly, in either case, one has to pick it in the moments when it is ripe and ready for the harvest. In terms of joy as a spiritual fruit, harvest time is any time. It's right there and ready to be reached for and picked. But you're the one who actually has to pick it. You're the one who has to take a bite of it in order to taste it and savor it. Fullness of joy comes when there is a deep sense of the presence of God in one's life. From that awareness flows the strong desire to share what one is experiencing with others. It's too good to keep for oneself alone. Pero esto queda contigo, but this is up to you. It does not automatically come flowing in on any tide to be awaited until the perfect moment of the turning of that tide before setting sail. Indeed, there are some steps which you must take in order to enjoy it to the fullest to which it can be enjoyed. Consider Habakkuk 3:17 and 19. Though the fig tree should not blossom, and there be no fruit on the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail, and the fields produce no food, though the flock should be cut off from the fold, and there be no cattle in the stalls, yet I will exult in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and he has made my feet like hinds' feet, and makes me walk on my high places. Notice here that this is an attitude that the writer chose to have in spite of the circumstances faced. What is helpful? Consider Psalm 37:4. Delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Again, that's to delight in meaning to take great pleasure or perhaps extreme satisfaction. But with how much of the heart must one seek him to experience this kind of joy? You will seek me, and you will find me when you search for me with all your heart. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles, and they will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Indeed, with joy as such a fruit, we can surely taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. So what does joy look like in your classroom? How do you model it? How do your learners sense your love, passion, and contentment as a teacher and linguophile? Indeed, it has to start with you. It's not the kind of thing that happens when you wait to sail with the tide. In fact, sometimes it may be even better experienced despite there not being enough water under the keel, or when the current of the incoming tide still has yet to turn. It's not an isolated or occasional consequence of faith, but rather an integral part of one's whole relation to God. And this leads me to ask, how are you with regard to taking regular time for prayer, or regular time to read from the Word? How much time do you spend in fellowship with other believers, but where there is encouragement? How much time do you spend serving? Now, none of these questions are being asked with ready answers in mind, but more for putting into our pockets to take and ponder on. Why would any of these make a difference with respect to experiencing the joy of the Lord in your classroom, in your school, anywhere, with anyone? Joy does not start with circumstances. Rather, it has to do with the attitude we choose to have at the get-go, in spite of however the circumstances may be. It's right there where you find it, but it's a fruit that has to be picked before it can be tasted and enjoyed. And the harvest time is any time. It begins with trusting and not letting your circumstances get the best of you. Rather, as we face them, it takes remembering the Lord for who he is. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge